Joining us now, Ranping Song is Developing Country Climate Program Manager at the World Resources Institute. David Livingston is an Associate Fellow with the Energy and Climate Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And Kerry Fulton is an Environmental Justice Consultant and Organizer with Empower DC. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Ranping, let me start with you. With President Trump threatening to pull out of the Paris Accord, is that agreement now at a crossroads?
No, actually, I don't think so, because every countries they make their own decision to join the agreement, and they do it out of their own interest. They actually, we heard from countries, including China, EU, other European countries, again and again and again, they're going to carry forward no water mod. So, of course, if U.S. is eventually pull out of the Paris Agreement, it will be not a good news for the global environment. But other countries will carry on because they're doing this for their own interests. They're not doing this for, just for the sake of doing it.
Right, but we are looking at a leadership role here, and China and the United States took that role in the signing of the accords. With the U.S. threatening to pull out, will the burden shift to China?
Yes. So we know that, when you're trying to do something really hard, we know transition to a low-carbon economy is really, really hard. So you want to have as many partners we want to have, right? So that's why U.S. want to, China want to work with the U.S., want to work with the EU, we want to work with other developing countries. We want to go to this together. But let me be clear. Some people see this as a burden sharing. We share a burden, but actually what this is opportunity sharing. So we all chip in, so we all benefit from it. There's so tremendous economic benefits coming out of this. China will want to invest, as we can see from renewable energy, from other infrastructures, and they want to work with other countries, so we can all invest together, so we can reap the benefit together. Okay, if U.S. is out, that will be, unfortunate, right. But it doesn't, change the fact that they want to go into this together.
Okay, Kerry, we're hearing some very uncompromising, harsh rhetoric coming out of the White House on this particular issue. But do you think there's room for change at a later stage? I mean, will the White House be flexible at some point?
That's a good question. I think one thing about the United States is that we're more than just the executive office. We have 3 branches, and the most important branch is our legislative branch. We have elections coming up right now. We have elections coming up in 2018, and that's the critical piece. It's always been the critical piece, is how we move our legislative branch to take action. So if he doesn't have that backing of a strong Republican-backed legislative branch, he's going to have to move. He's going to have to figure out another solution so that he can reach any type of solution. So that's what we're hoping for, is to really get the people to look at how we move locally to change federal and then international as well.
So domestic politics has a lot to do with this?
Yes, it definitely does.
David, China is moving ahead with its obligations to the Paris Accords. I want you to take a listen to Liu Jie. He's China's permanent representative at the United Nations. Let's watch.
No matter how the international situation changes, China will firmly implement the vision of innovative, coordinated, green, open, and shared development, and actively cope with the climate change. This is not only because of requirements inherent in the concept of sustainable development, but also because of our responsibility in building a community with a shared future for mankind.
So, David, given this skepticism that we're seeing in the United States right now, is Beijing poised to become the leading proponent of efforts to combat climate change?
I think it certainly will, where it's in its own self-interest. Yeah. And this is a unique moment in time, really a juncture in time, because if you look at the Paris Agreement, it's not just the first really promising effort amongst 190 plus countries to combat climate change, where everyone's coming with their own commitment. It's from the ground up, not from the top down. But it happens to be an opportunity for the first international agreement where China is truly in the driver's seat. China traditionally hasn't been as interested in multilateral agreements such as this in history, and it was a major step forward to get China to participate this on equal footing with the U.S. And with a number of other countries that eventually got some other key countries such as India in the boat. China is seen as a real driver of the Paris Climate Accord. It couldn't have happened without it. And the United States, at the moment, still has a leadership role as long as it stays in. But if the U.S. withdraws, China becomes the sole country in the driver's seat, and then is in a position to use the Paris Agreement to derive significant leverage, diplomatically as well as otherwise. And the thing to remember, too, is that in addressing climate change, China is able to address a number of priorities that are already in its self-interest, regardless of the climate problem or any obligations to the international community. You've got local air pollution issues in cities like Beijing. Right. You've got energy security challenges with China's oil imports rising again. You've got a number of different policy priorities, the need to have more energy efficient and a more streamlined and rational energy production sector, more rational coal production sector. So in implementing the Paris Agreement, it also checks a number of domestic policy boxes that are very much in its own interest. I would expect China to push ahead with this quite aggressively.
Right, Ramping, and talking about those domestic challenges that China faces, as David points out, China will act in its own interest. I mean, we know about pollution over cities in China. There are rising water levels in many rivers in China as well. Put this in some kind of perspective for us. What kind of risks does China face?
Well, for one study shows us, if climate change actually happens, as we're projecting to do so, right. Eastern coast cities in China actually rise, 16 to 24 inches, the sea level rise. So that puts the cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Xiamen, those most developed cities in China in jeopardy. That's why that's really real, physical risk. At the same time, we're talking about if the climate change actually happened. Yes, we actually is on the way to do that. Climate change will cause 5% of water resource available reduction for China. So it's like just 5% of that will be gone. Fresh water resources will be no there. Not to mention the air pollution issues, all the air pollution that were actually happening to people's health, right? So we know that how many people actually, a lot of people actually die from air pollution, from prematurely, just because that there's a lot of burning of coals. And all this will be driving underlying drivers for China to take more aggressive action.
Kerry, there was a time in the United States when an incoming administration would abide by agreements signed by a previous administration. That doesn't seem to be the case right now. And how much of a challenge does that pose, not just here in the United States, but for the world, when it sees such radical changes?
I mean, that's an amazing question, and it is something we haven't seen, especially in my lifetime, is a president who is going against tradition. And I think in a lot of ways, that makes us very vulnerable. If we're not seen as someone who can be a leader, as a powerhouse on what the future looks like, then we're holding ourselves back. We're also isolating ourselves from the global world. So I think it's dangerous. I think it's toxic and it's not sustainable. I really wonder how long we'll be able to do that, especially when we're talking about reinvesting in non-sustainable fossil fuels once again.
David, get back to your point on the burdens that China would face in taking that leadership role on. But of course, there are also advantages for China, as you've been pointing out, that will accrue, especially in the development of renewable energy.
That's right. Last year was a banner year for renewable energy investment, likely the highest we've seen on record after a similarly very, very banner year in 2011. The danger here, though, is that the uncertainty over the future of the Paris Agreement and the U.S. participation in it is already starting to have a little bit of a dampening effect in markets. I was looking, and it looks like clean energy investment in the first quarter of this year is down about 17%. And the largest drivers of that decline in investment are in China and the United States. Now, there are two ways to read that. One is that the political uncertainty is leading to a decline in renewable energy investment at a time when it needs to continue rising. The other, and perhaps more positive spin to put on that, is the fact that this fairly precipitous price declines we're seeing in renewable technologies, from wind turbines to solar panels, means that the same level of investment goes further and further. So we can actually maintain the same level of clean energy deployment globally with fewer and fewer dollars every year. It's too early to tell exactly what's playing out right now and how market participants are reacting to this. But I think that there's a danger in over-reading the significance of the Trump administration's potential withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement on actual market activity. It's important to remember that it'll take it's a 4-year process to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Otherwise, they would have to withdraw from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which they could do immediately. But that's, I think, even more costly and unwise and imprudent from a strategy and diplomatic perspective. So if they do withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, you've got 4 years for this to play out, in which case a number of different political scenarios in the United States can take hold. And in the meantime, project developers, investors, and the like have to continue, making investments about infrastructure that has a 30-year-plus time frame. So I think we should be wary of overreacting to short-term noise, and we should keep an eye on long-term signals, which is about the decline in the price of technology.
Just on that point, if we look at the development of renewable energy, I mean, on the one hand, we might say the United States may miss out, but for U.S. business, it does provide opportunities. And could there be pressure coming from U.S. businesses to politicians to say, look, we need to move in this direction?
That's absolutely right, Anand. And it's actually one of the most fascinating things that we've seen in this current debate over the future of the Paris Climate Agreement. Like never before, we've seen businesses, and not just clean energy businesses or those with, so to speak, vested interests in seeing climate policy, but companies like ExxonMobil, companies like Shell, large international oil companies, including even some international coal companies, various members of the Fortune 500 coming out and saying, we think it's wise for the United States to stay in the Paris Climate Agreement. That's number one, because they're taking a long-term view of their business, and they're saying we need to have a healthy society, and we need to have a healthy growing economy, not just now, but in the future, to sell products and services to. But they also see that this is important for the U.S., just U.S. diplomatic strength, U.S. credibility, policy credibility, and so that the U.S. doesn't become exposed to potential green industrial policy or green protectionism in the future. Who's to say that if China goes ahead and creates a carbon price, which would be twice the size of the EU emission trading system and larger than all the carbon markets in the world put together, that China wouldn't later decide in coordination with the EU to put a tax 1, 3, 5, 10% on all U.S. goods entering in to account for the fact that the U.S. doesn't have a carbon price, but much of the rest of the world does. These are things that the U.S. Shouldn't expose itself to. Makes no sense to take that risk without some sort of benefit, and I would hardly see it as the sort of America First policy that the Trump administration is thinking about. And so what I think you see is CEOs that have to look not just at politics and rhetoric, but at bottom line, cents and dollars, are starting to realize that, and they're coming out in support of the climate agreement in a way that we haven't seen in years past.